A decent portion of this series has been based around online gaming or streaming ahead of its time, and this episode will be no different. But while two subjects of my previous videos, Nintendo's Satellaview and the Sega channel, use satellites and cable television respectively to download games pre-broadband, only one add-on that I've covered, the Play Cable, actually used a phone line, much like how modern internet connections work. Well, you may have seen my Sega channel video that I just mentioned and saw that the Genesis did have access to such a service in 1994, albeit by cable, but surprisingly, it wouldn't be the first foray into online gaming for the console. Even though it wasn't released in the West, the Sega Mega Modem and its associated services allowed the console to connect to what would be considered an early version of the internet by phone line 4 whole years earlier. It's a bit obscure, but without a doubt, it certainly is a wonder of the retro gaming world. Known as the Mega Drive in Japan, the console saw a release there on the 22nd of October 1988. The system was to see plenty of peripherals and add-ons over its lifespan. One of the earliest was the Sega Mega Modem. Launched on the 3rd of November 1990 for 9,800 yen, the system plugged into the back of first-gen Mega Drives via the DE9 expansion port that those early revision consoles had. A phone cable protruded out of that, and if connected into a phone port, gained the console access to the internet at a blistering speed of 1200 bits per second. As an added feature, there was a microphone built into the left-hand side of the modem that allowed rudimentary voice chat. But otherwise, it was as described, a no-frills modem. It didn't just allow access to a form of what we would think of as the internet, however, as that didn't really exist in 1990, but instead a handful of dedicated services. The most prominent of such was called the Sega Mega Net. Otherwise known as the Sega Network System, this launched alongside the modem and allowed a selection of games to be downloaded and played for a monthly fee. Several dozen games were made available over the service's lifespan and could be accessed by a cartridge called Game Toshokan, which translates to Sega Game Library. You could even buy the modem and the game library bundled for 12,800 yen, although there would be an additional fee of 800 yen per month over a 6-month contract to be paid directly into Sega's coffers too, which translated to only about $6. This subscription also included an online newsletter, but as you can imagine, the real draw of the service was the games. These weren't humongous thanks to the limits of dial-up speed, and as such, were quite simple compared to the retail releases on cartridges. For example, the two launch games were Putter Golf, which is as described, and Phantasy Star 2 Amiya no Boken. That translates to Text Adventures and tells the backstories of the characters from the Phantasy Star universe. Most games were like this, being far from fully featured. The small size, however, being roughly 128 kilobytes each, meant that downloading time was kept to between 5 and 8 minutes. While most of these games were developed only for the MegaNet, there are a few recognizable titles such as Flicky and Columns. The real innovation, however, were the several games that supported online competitive play, existing years before the games industry would see anything like it again on consoles. Again, this was quite restrictive thanks to the limits of the hardware and internet connection speeds, but tel-tel Mahjong and tel-tel Stadium were two such titles to pull this off, both being developed by Sunsoft. The lag between players was measured in seconds, but this didn't really matter for the type of gameplay that was required. Mahjong is, of course, turn-based, while tel-tel Stadium has you taking the role of a coach of a team for a baseball game. The key is that you don't actually control the individual players, but instead give commands to do with pitching and batting. This worked out well for the laggy online play, since it was very much turn-based as well, thus disguising the lag. Sega were hoping to corner more than just the gaming crowd, however, and launched a suite of software geared towards boring, adult responsibilities. This was called Mega Answer, with answer being spelled A-N-S-E-R. Yeah. Mega Answer was primarily focused around banking and other financial tasks. For the princely sum of 72,000 yen, you could deck out your Mega Drive with a printer and a 10-key controller. Alternatively, you could buy the Mega Answer cartridge all by its lonesome for 3,400 yen. With the software running, you could do tasks such as balancing checks, transferring funds, and other fun stuff to do with loans. The printer could then be used to print out statements, receipts, and whatever else was relevant. Two banks were supported, Bank of Nagoya and Osaka Bank, as well as a firm called Sumitomo Life Insurance. If you were hoping to get some extra value out of that controller, however, a piece of software called Nikkan Sports Pro Yakyu Van also supported it. Costing 7,000 yen, this showed baseball game statistics and scores in real time as they were being played. So, what happened to all of this? You're probably wondering why the Mega Modem is never mentioned more and seemingly banished to the back pages of retro gaming history. Well, put simply, it was a flop. For one, Sega had a hard time securing third-party support, which was a problem that plagued the company for years to come in other endeavours. But otherwise, it was too expensive. While the hardware itself was somewhat affordable, if we forget about the printer and controller add-ons for the Mega Answer, connecting anything to a telephone line in the early 90s was quite pricey for most. You were essentially making long-distance phone calls, and back then, that didn't come cheap. Looking aside from the fact that there were a limited amount of games available overall, and that the Mega Drive just wasn't really that popular in Japan, it's no surprise that by 1992, Mega Modems could be found in bargain bins. And as a final kick in the guts, in 1993, Sega released a new hardware revision of the console called the Mega Drive 2, which removed that rear expansion port completely. Without that, the modem couldn't even be plugged in. I have no idea when the Mega Answer service ended, but it does seem that MegaNet stopped being a paid service September 1992, being free up until its eventual discontinuation in the February or March of 1993. It's alleged that the service only had 3,500 subscribers at the very end. It would not be the end of software for the modem, however, as interestingly, during 1994, a service called Sansan was released that supported it, the Mega Drive 2 be damned. This allowed online play of the strategy board game Go and included an early instance of cross-platform online play since Mega Drive players could verse those on the PC. It didn't sell in high volumes as you can probably imagine, so these days are quite rare. You might be wondering why this never left Japan and launched in America, but the matter of that fact is that it very nearly did. Reading American gaming publications of the time, you'll find that Sega actually advertised the modem in the run-up to the console being launched there. It was to be called the tel-tel, and quote, "You'll be able to play against friends in other cities or across town," end quote. So it was evident that they were focusing on the gaming side of things rather than financial software. By CES 1991, Sega announced that the console would see store shelves by the July of that year and retail for $100. But sadly, this was more or less the last anything was heard about the tel-tel from Sega Towers. By May, it wasn't even featured in adverts for the Genesis anymore. The concept of the tel-tel making it to America completely fizzled out. By March 1992, publications like Digital Press were referring to it as vaporware. It became a bit of a joke. It later came out in an interview with the then COO of Sega of America, Shinobu Toyota, that an online baseball game was in fact demonstrated at CES, but the latency was too high for any real playability. I guess after a while they figured the infrastructure in America wouldn't be fast enough, and that phone bills would likely cost too much anyway, so it's assumed they quietly cut it loose to focus on other products. But wait, this was not to be the end of the Sega Mega Modem. As you may or may not be aware, Sega consoles were, and are still, huge in Brazil. To cut a long story short, Brazil imposes high taxes on foreign companies to encourage local growth. So naturally, most games that are sold there are hugely expensive. However, Sega set up a local distributor called Tectoy that manufactured consoles in the country to get around this tax restriction. They were the only company to do as such, and because of it, enjoyed massive growth in Brazil, while all the competitors' games were instead mostly pirated. Following on from this, their own version of the MegaNet was launched in the November of 1995. It was a completely redesigned modem, and with it connected, users could send and receive emails and faxes, chat, use it for banking with the local financial institutions, as well as read gaming news and information. There are even digital comics. It sold for 80 reals, which is Brazilian currency, and had a monthly fee of either 5 reals for 30 connections or 9 reals for unlimited access. It was also free for the first 2 months in order to reel new users in. Its successor was the MegaNet 2, which was based on the X-Band, but that's a video for another day. So, what if you want to use one of these today? They can be found quite readily available on websites like eBay for about $120 US, but as you can imagine, the services it originally connected to at 1200 baud have long since been turned off. However, with a will, there's a way, and certain smarties have figured out how to get the games with peer-to-peer multiplayer to work again. For example, the game Cyberball included support for the modem, and it will still work over a network. The only catch is that the Genesis needs to be tricked into thinking it's Japanese. It's only then that an extra menu in-game for the feature will appear. There's a great forum post on Sega 16 detailing how to do this for Cyberball and a few other games. You can find it linked below. Otherwise, if you wish to try the games that were only on MegaNet, they've popped up in a few places over the years. A few games can be found on Sega Ages compilations, as well as the game No Can Zoomy series on the Mega CD. Otherwise, games appeared on the Sega B Club service if you can somehow go back in time and use that. Ultimately, Sega should be commended for attempting such a service when it did. It goes without saying that this preceded what is now very common on modern consoles. It's a shame that it was let down by technology and the high cost of phone calls. While it could be argued that Sega tried to hit too many different markets without any third-party support, at least they tried. It no doubt laid the groundwork for the Sega Channel and everything else that arrived in the next few decades. Hello retro gamers, and thanks for watching. Links to sources and videos can be found in the description box. Catch you next time!